to river Indus. And this was the empire which also included the land between the Sirdarya and the Amudarya. And this land is actually Uzbekistan. For centuries, the heritage of modern Iran and Central Asia has been rooted in the Persian Chronicle. Western historians always refer to this region as the Persianate world. But Raza Shah Pahlavi in 1935 renamed the country Iran to promote a sense of distinct identity. I spent time in Iran and I spent time in Uzbekistan and went there to sift through the veneer of modernity and uncover the romance and ethos which was Persia. The story of Iran cannot be told without recognizing two emperors who are central to the history. One is Cyrus the Great and the other is Darius. Cyrus, who organized and who set up the empire, is considered to be an important personality in the history of Iran even today. To celebrate many of the victories, Emperor Cyrus made the city of Pasargade. And this was the city to which emperors of the Achaemenid Empire came to take the oath of office. Today, only the mausoleum of Cyrus stands in the ruins of the city, which is only about 30 miles from Shiraz. The emperor after Cyrus, Darius, also made his own city, and he called it Takht-e-Jamshid, and it is also known as Persepolis. The UNESCO considers Persepolis one of the most well-preserved ruins in the world, and to this place come thousands of people, or millions of people, as tourists. Importantly, Persepolis was the ceremonial city of the empire. And every Nowruz, Darius received gifts from the local rulers of the region. And what were the gifts they received? The gifts were lapis lazuli from Baltistan, ibex from Chitral, Bactrian camels from Gobi Desert, and many other exotic animals from around the world. So let us admire the remains of the glorious city it once was. The story of the first Emperor Cyrus is inscribed on an ancient clay cylinder which they discovered in Iraq in the 19th century. And this clay cylinder, also called the Cyrus cylinder, is on display in the British Museum. But the story of Darius is carved on a mountain, the Besutun Mountains, which is near the city of Kermanshah, which is near the border of Iraq. For us, it was very difficult to climb the boulders and the scaffolds which should surround the inscriptions, but we braved it. The history of the empire is carved in 3 languages and was written about 2,000 years ago, but it was only discovered relatively recently. Cyrus was buried at Pasargade, which was a city, but Darius did not get the honors of being buried in Persepolis. In fact, he is buried in the hills of Naqsh-e-Rustam, which is not very far from Persepolis. And this is where Darius' grave is, and there are many other Achaemenid kings Rustam. After Darius, Persians and Greeks fought wars with each other for centuries. And in one of the wars, the Persians destroyed the city of Acropolis, which was so sacred to the Greeks. The Greeks took their revenge centuries later when Alexander from Macedonia attacked Persepolis and destroyed it and put it on fire. And then he announced himself as the emperor of the Achaemenid Empire. People call Alexander the Great, but he was anything but great. The Western people think he was great, but the Persians and the Muslim world think that he was, the Persians, in fact the Zoroastrians called him Shaitan, because he destroyed all the temples of the Zoroastrians throughout Iran and in Central Asia. After the end of the Greek rule, the next dynasty to rule the region was the Parthians. And the Parthians ruled for 400 years, and their rule extended to the region of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in Pakistan, and this is seen in the Takht-e-Bahir monastery at near Mardan. After the Parthians came the Sassanids, and the Sassanids' religion was Zoroastrianism. We call the Zoroastrians Parsis in Pakistan. The Sassanids would be the last pre-Islamic dynasty of Iran before the Arabs invaded Persia, and that happened in the 7th century. The Sassanids left behind exquisite carvings in the mountain sites throughout the region. And the most visited one is on Naqsh Rustam, and it shows the Sassanid ruler being blessed by the Zoroastrian god Ahura Mazda. The city of Kermanshah, which is near the border of Iraq, has remarkable carvings from the Sassanid period. And these also were done about like 2,400 years ago. And these carvings attract many, many tourists from across the world. For over 1,000 years, the religion of Cyrus, Darius, in fact the entire Achaemenid Empire was Zoroastrianism. And about 300 kilometers from Isfahan is the city of Yazd, the sacred city for the Zoroastrians in Iran, and they come here to worship at this Atish Kadeh. There is an anomaly in our belief which needs to be corrected. The common misconception about the Zoroastrians is that they are fire worshippers. Actually, they're not. They only use fire as a symbol of purity. And in this Atish Kadeh, the fire has been alive for the last 700 years. The Zoroastrians don't bury their dead like we do in the earth because they think it pollutes the earth. So they purify the body and take it to an area which they call Dakhma, or a sky burial. They leave the body on the hill for the vultures and elements to take care of it. The history of Iran is divided into two periods, the pre-Islamic era and the present Islamic era. So far, I have talked only about the pre-Islamic era. But in 637, 5 years after the passing away of our Prophet, Khalifa Hazrat Umar's army defeated the Persians in the city of Qadisiyah, which is today near Karbala, and an entire region of Persia lay open to the Arabs. And the Arabs not only occupied this region, but they brought a new religion and a new language to Persia. It took, however, 50 more years before Islam could spread to Central Asia. And when Bukhara fell, the Arabs destroyed the Zoroastrian temples and built mosques over them. This is Atari Mabu Mosque in Bukhara, and it is the oldest mosque in that region. The Persians never objected to Islam coming to Persia, but they looked down on the Arabs, and they considered the Arabs as uncouth and uncultured. And this led to the rise of an Iranian dynasty. They were the natives of Iran, and they were called the Samanids. Samanids broke away from the traditional respect they gave to the Abbasid Khalifa in Baghdad, and today they established a rule which in making Bukhara as the capital of the Samanid Empire. The Samanids supported several philosophers and poets, and among them was Firdausi. Firdausi brought glory not only to Persia, but to the Persian language. He wrote the story of the Persian kings in poetry form, and it was called the Shahnameh. The Shahnameh is entirely in Persian, not a word of Arabic, although it was written in the period when Arabs dominated Persia. It took 30 years for Firdausi to complete the Shahnameh, and it happened in the term of Mahmud Ghaznavi. The Shahnameh, which has the story of Sohrab and Rustam, has 50,000 verses. And like I said, it is written in pure Persian, not a single word of Arabic in it. When the Shahnameh was finally completed, he presented the copy to the Sultan of Ghaznavi. He looked at it, he was not very happy. And he was not happy because Shahnameh only praised the kings of the pre-Islamic region. So on one Friday afternoon, when Firdausi was after prayers at the Hammam, a messenger from the court brought him a gift which consisted of a purse of several silver coins. And this was instead of the one gold coin for every verse which Mahmud Ghaznavi had promised him. So what did Firdausi do? He gave half the money to the bath attendant and the other half to the boys who were looking after his shoes. Several years later, Mahmud Ghaznavi realized what a magnificent piece of literature and poetry Shahnameh is. So he then sent several camels loaded with gifts to the house of Firdausi. Unfortunately, as the camels came from one city gate, the funeral of Firdausi was leaving through the other. The daughter of Firdausi returned all the gifts to the palace. And now I will fast forward by a century to the 11th century. And this was when Turkoman tribe rose in the region of the Aral Sea of Uzbekistan and moved west. They were the Sunni Seljuks who became the ancestors of the Ottoman Empire. The Seljuks gradually adopted the Persian culture, the language, and made Isfahan their capital. The illiterate Seljuks on horsebacks gave to the Muslim world madrasas, universities, caravanserais, but the most profound architectural expression of the Seljuk rule is the Jame Mosque of Seljuk in Isfahan. The Jame Mosque is indeed a museum of Islamic art. Among the scholars supported by the Seljuks was the poet Jalaluddin Rumi. His family was invited by the Seljuk Sultan to settle in Konya, where Jalaluddin Rumi's grave is. The other great poet Seljuk sponsored was Sadi. And Sadi's mausoleum is in Shiraz. Poet Sadi took his takhallus after the benefactor who was the Seljuk Sultan, Sadi Zangi. So he called himself Sadi after the Sultan of the Seljuk Sultan. In his mausoleum are inscribed verses from his two great works, Bostan and Golestan. 25 years after Sadi, Hafiz Shirazi would bring glory to the Persian literature. Every Iranian home has a copy of Diwan-e-Hafiz, and they believe it is divinely inspired. A mystic even said that Hafiz was not a prophet, but he certainly had a book. Despite his fame, the Hafiz got into trouble with the Mongol Emperor Temurlen. What happened was, Hafiz fell in love with a young girl by the name of Shakur-Nabat. And he wrote in one of his poetries that for the mole on her cheek, he would give her Samarkand and Bukhara. When Temurlen read this poetry, he was very upset. They called him to the palace. And he said, my soldiers have given their life for Samarkand and Bukhara, and you want to give away this city for the mole on a girl's cheek? Hafiz looked at the Sultan and said, look, I did not mean any disrespect for you. It tells you about my generosity, but I meant no disrespect for you. The Emperor Temurlen, he smiled and sent him away with many gifts. The poet had an easy life, and he frequented taverns, and he criticized the religious zealots whenever he got an opportunity. So it is not surprising that when Hafiz died, his detractors said that he cannot be buried in a Muslim graveyard. He was not a Muslim. So after a lot of discussion, it was decided that why don't we consult the Diwan-e-Hafiz to decide whether he could be buried in the Muslim graveyard. So they tore pieces of Hafiz's poetry, put it in an urn, and asked a young boy who was passing by to pick up one verse from the collection. And this is what it said. And when the spirit of Hafiz has fled, though the ocean of sins has closed over his head, he may find place in God's paradise. They allowed him to be buried in the Muslim graveyard which we just saw. The Seljuks were magnanimous in their sponsorship. They invited Omar Khayyam to Isfahan and set up an observatory in the city. Khayyam is usually celebrated as a poet, but few people know that he was also a scientist and an astronomer. In fact, a crater on the moon is named after Khayyam. It's called the Khayyam crater. Also, in the city of Khayyam, Nishapur, is a tomb of Iran's respected Sufi poet, Fariduddin Attar. 300 years of Seljuk rule faced existential threat in the 13th century, and it all began when a letter arrived to the Seljuk Sultan in Urgench. The letter came from Uzbekistan region, and it was no ordinary letter. It was a letter by Genghis Khan. And in the letter, Genghis Khan wrote to the Seljuk Sultan, respected Sultan, I am from the land of the rising sun, and you are from the setting sun. I no longer crave for land, I do not want wealth, but I would like to trade with the Muslims. Instead of responding favorably to Genghis Khan's request, the Seljuk Sultan very arrogantly blackened the face of his representatives and sent them back in an insulting way. Genghis Khan was not a man to be trifled with. He was livid with anger, and he personally led an army which destroyed Persian cities one after another as though he was swatting flies. The Iranian city of Nishapur was completely flattened by the troops of Genghis Khan. Exactly a century later, after Genghis Khan, another conqueror, Temur Lane, would establish the Timurid dynasty. And he also went on a spree and destroyed many Persian cities, and the most prominent city he picked was Isfahan. And from that city, he brought artisans and craftsmen to Uzbekistan to work on his favorite city, Samarkand. Samarkand, as you can see, was emblazoned and embellished by the artisans from Isfahan. And the magnificent square is called the Registan, and it is surrounded by madrasas which vividly evoke the architecture of Isfahan. The mausoleum where he is buried, Temur Lane is buried, is called Gur Amir. And this architecture also resembles the architecture of Iran, of Isfahan. And of all the mausoleums in the world I have visited, I have no hesitation in saying that this is aesthetically the most noble I have seen. Temur is buried in Samarkand at the feet of his teacher. Until the 15th century, Iran was a predominantly Sunni country. In fact, the learned people from the Ottoman Empire came to Iran to attend schools and learn the religious matters. All that changed in the 16th century when the Safavids came to power, and the leader was Shah Ismail. Shah Ismail proclaimed Shiaism as the official religion of Iran, and he forcefully converted all the Sunnis from their faith to Shiaism. Now, you must be wondering, I've taken so many names, Sassanids, Samanids, and Safavids. Well, to simplify the matter, Sassanids were non-Muslims in the last dynasty before Islam came. The Samanids were Persian Muslim dynasty, and so were the Safavids. Under the Safavids, Isfahan underwent an architectural cultural renaissance. And the city is truly a museum of Islamic art. That is why Isfahan is called Nisf-e-Jahan. The Naqsh-e-Jahan square in Isfahan is a large maidan around which are located the jewels of Islamic art. All these are mosques and palaces in Naqsh-e-Jahan Maidan. It is now called Imam Square. Ali Kapur Palace, Sheikh Lutfullah Mosque. This is the peacock ceiling. There's a peacock here, and when the light comes, sunlight comes, they illuminate the region here which looks like the tail of the peacock, hence it's called the peacock ceiling. Isfahan is called half of the world for good reason. There are sprawling gardens and rivers in the city, and there are pristine palaces which are located all over the beautiful city of Isfahan. Hushed Behj gardens, which is crowded with people, and they're only disturbed by the singing of the nightingales. Chehel Satoon Palace. Chehel means 40. There are 40 pillars. Actually, they're 20, but the reflection in the water gives them another 20, so they become 40 palace, 40 Satoon. That's why it's called Chehel Satoon. The 200 years of Safavid dynasty, which defined the culture and the Shia faith of Iran, ended when they were defeated by the non-Iranian Sunnis from Afghanistan. But before long, among the Persians rose a warlord by the name of Nadir. And Nadir Shah restored the Safavid dynasty and restored the king back to the palace, to the throne, and he remained in Isfahan as an advisor to the Safavid royalty. Now, Nadir Shah is respected in Iran a lot, but is reviled in India because he is responsible for the peacock, for the destruction in Delhi and the capture of the peacock throne and the Kohinoor. After Nadir Shah, the capital was moved from Isfahan to Shiraz, which is famous for its citadel. And the next dynasty of the Qajars made this colorful mosque called the Nasirul Mulk Mosque in Shiraz. This is the most photographed mosque in Iran. The Qajars then decided to move the capital from Shiraz to Tehran, where they built the Bulistan Palace. This is the marble throne where the coronation of Reza Shah took place. And this is the replica of the peacock throne in the Bulistan Palace. The Qajars were very profligate and they brought Iran to a financial crisis, and then the Qajars were defeated by the army officer by the name of Reza Khan, who took over the control of the Iranian government. Reza Shah was a nationalist. He was greatly impressed by Commander Ataturk, and he forcibly westernized the people of Iran. He closed the madrasas, made the people dress in suits, took the chadars from the heads of women while they were in the bazaars. So he became very, very unpopular. Reza Shah, when he stood up to the British, he was then dismissed by the British government, exiled to South Africa, and his son was placed on his throne. Iranians didn't want a new king. What they wanted was democracy. And they elected a nationalist leader called Mossadegh in 1953. But the Americans, in a coup, unseated Mossadegh and brought back the Shah. And the Iranians have still not forgiven the Americans for this great insult against their democracy. The Shah's autocratic rule plunged the country into chaos, and finally, he was forced to flee Iran. His generals are shown kissing his feet, asking him not to leave the country. 2 weeks after the Shah fled, Ayatollah Khomeini returned after a 15-year exile to a rapturous welcome in Iran. The sun finally set on the Persian monarchy, and the new dawn brought in the Islamists to rule. That was 45 years ago. I returned to Iran recently. And today, Iran is a blend of ancient culture and modern vision. Its favorite cities, Shiraz and Isfahan, exude the romance of Persian ethos, but they are modern and they are progressive. Isfahan and other cities are filled with gardens, and it is a delight to walk on the wide and clean pavements of Isfahan and relax at the Chahar Bahar Boulevard, where singing nightingales entertain you. All the cities I visited in Iran appear to be clean and aesthetically designed. The lifestyle is relaxed. There is discipline on the roads. I rarely saw a single policeman and no SUVs with VIPs with gun-toting people sitting in the back, forcing normal citizens to move away from the road, from the cars. The Iranians find this very insulting against the culture and against their religion. Weapons are not allowed to be possessed by citizens in Iran, much less displayed. The bazaars are busy and spotless. And while remaining in the confines of the law, women sport high fashions in the streets of Tehran. Iran doesn't have famous hotels from the American and the Western chains, but its hotels are world class, very comfortable and very, very nice to live, to spend holidays with. Young couples in Iran enjoy a quiet dinner in a traditional restaurant, and they settle on tufts and have chillo kebabs.
Hello.
And the food is delicious. The infrastructure of the country is well maintained. The highways, the airport, the public transport services, including the metros, function efficiently and beautifully. Despite severe economic sanctions Iran faces, the challenge are faced with dignity and immense courage. Iranians continue to be recognized internationally. They've received a Nobel Prize and also received Academy Award for their work in movie industry. The Iranians are proud of their culture and their heritage and are convinced that despite the severe sanctions, they will ultimately triumph and prosper.